Welcome everybody to the Judaica section, the Judaica Interface Lecture, the Jerusalem Science Contest on Nuclear Science. My name is Rabbi Heschel Weiner. I am the director of the Martin and Gertrude Walder Science Laboratory and Learning Center, which hosts the Jerusalem Science Contest. And this is the first of two Judaica lectures on nuclear energy. Now, you should have in your hands, and by the way, I made this handy book of all of the various files which we uploaded for the Judaica lecture. Now, you don't have to take your heart medicine just yet. You don't have to, you're not going to get a heart attack. You're not expected to read all of this. Much of the text, much of the papers which we uploaded are only going to be used in terms of excerpts, and I'll point those out as I go along. There are certain things that you actually ought to have read and digested very well. And those I'll point out to you as we go on. Like for example, the paper which is, I would say, really important, the paper that you ought to get to know very well, is the paper which is called How Green is Judaism by David Vogel. Okay, that I would say is the main paper, and that in total is about just shy of about 20 pages. 23 pages, and then it comes, and then are the footnotes. Then all of the papers by Dr. Gerstenfeld, we're just going to pick excerpts from the pages, and as I go through it, I'll tell you what to underline or what to bracket off. But for the most part, I just reproduced the entire essay for your own enjoyment, interest, and self-edification. But you're not going to be expected to know Dr. Gerstenfeld's papers in total. Now, also, there were a number of excerpts and citations in Hebrew, which when I refer to them, I will adequately translate them into English. You are not responsible to be able to know them in their original Hebrew, but as far as I know, I was unable to find the translation, or at least easily to find a translation in English. When I was able to, like for example, for the Mishnah, then I downloaded a translation. But certain responsa, tshuvos of the Rishonim, which have not been translated, I downloaded them in their original Hebrew, and then I'll go over them, I'll translate them, and I'll discuss the significance about them. Also, what's very important for you to have is a copy of the notes that I wrote, entitled Jerusalem Science Contest Nuclear Energy Judaica Lecture. And these notes are a product of how I organize the information into a more digestible form. So if you have these 4 pages in front of you, these are the notes that I'm going to be going over and referring to. And essentially, I'm going to be going over my notes, and I'll just elaborate a little on them where I feel that maybe my notes were too cryptic, and I just want to just explain them a little bit more. Now, when you're talking about nuclear energy and the Torah, obviously you are not going to find in the written Torah, nor in the Talmud and the Mishnah, you're not going to find any references to nuclear energy, unless you want to say Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or, Vayehi Or, is discussing nuclear energy, a radiating energy, so that you could say that, well, the Torah opens up with nuclear energy. the energy of the Big Bang, Vayomer Elohim Yeyor, if you want to interpret it that way, so then you could say the Torah actually opens up with nuclear energy. But we really don't know what the word or means. Generally, we translate it as light, and we're not necessarily going to explain it as nuclear energy. And still, even if it were nuclear energy, it doesn't give us any information other than God created it. So you could either take the attitude that the Torah does not even speak to nuclear energy. Don't even take a look in the Torah about nuclear energy, because you're not going to find it mentioned by name, and not in the Talmud, and not in the Mishnah, and not for the most of the responsa for the thousands of years since the close of the Talmud. And you could say there's no discussion of nuclear energy. But that's not the way we as Jews approach an issue like this. We say that the Torah encompasses everything. And if you can't find the specific subject in the Torah, you will find principles which guide us and direct us in terms of how we're supposed to deal and approach something like nuclear energy. What is nuclear energy? It is an energy which has been discovered and is being harnessed by humankind in order to serve society. Well, in primitive days, you also had sources of energy that were harnessed and used. Fire, wind, water, and then later on, electricity, the usage of animals. Animals as a source of energy and power. So, since the dawn of history, whenever humankind, I'll just use the term man, and I'm including women in this as well, but whenever man was faced with an energy source that he thought he could somehow take control of and harness it and use it to his will, the Torah spoke about what are the person's responsibilities vis-a-vis harnessing that resource, that energy source. So the Torah is replete, it's filled with all types of guidelines that direct man in terms of how to use the resources that God provided to us, and how do we have to take care to guard the resource, that it doesn't get out of hand, that it doesn't hurt other people, that it doesn't hurt the environment, and how not to deplete our sources of the energy. The Torah speaks heartily about all of these things. What about in the event that, God forbid, a tragedy happens, a fire breaks out? The Torah speaks. What are the responsibilities of a person to remedy the damages caused by an outbreak of the power source? So, as we said, whether you're talking about any type of power source that was discovered thousands of years ago versus nuclear energy, which is only now being harnessed, but the principles and the directions of our responsibilities towards all of that are detailed out in the extreme in the Torah. Let's take a look at the beginning of my notes. Number 1, nuclear science was heard of when the Torah was given and later developed via the Talmud. However, the same issues that are poignant regarding nuclear energy already presented themselves in ancient times and are dealt with by the Torah. Any time that society tries to harness an energy source, be it a source of wind, water, fire, animal, electrical, or even nuclear energies, the Torah and Talmud have long ago dealt with our responsibilities vis-a-vis the source's safe use and environmental stewardship. The Torah does not speak to the nature of nuclear energy. That information is covered extensively in science books that you have studied. So as a note, basically, God is telling us, look, you want to learn science? Go study the science books. Don't look in the Chumash to find a discussion of nuclear energy. You're not going to find it. And dig as much as you want, chances are you're not going to be able to glean it. So study the science books, learn all about the properties of nuclear energy. But what is the Torah's purpose? To tell you what man's responsibilities are, humankind's responsibilities are vis-a-vis using this energy and guarding the environment. Back to my notes. That information is covered extensively. Oh, excuse me. I already read that sentence. The Torah addresses human responsibilities regarding the entire scope of energy discovery and production as it relates to benefiting society, not injuring society, safeguarding the environment by not depleting or destroying material resources. The Torah speaks to the human side of the issue, not the nature side. By the way, I'm sorry for just reading these, but I wrote these notes. So I'm just trying to say in a more compact way, it's better if I read the notes and just elaborate a little bit on them, because if I just speak without notes, this lecture will be a lot longer than it needs to be. Number 2. There is not one Torah book or section of Torah law that is dedicated to these issues. The laws and principles are interspersed throughout Torah laws. There is no one section of Shulchan Aruch. There is no one Masechet in the Talmud. There is no one Parsha in the Torah that talks about a person's responsibilities around the environment and the usage of energy sources. The statements by the sages, Chazal, are interspersed in many different places in the Talmud. So it's difficult to collect all these different statements and bring them together into one study book. So that was the purpose of actually the work that I did for you, was to try and see what I could find and to decipher out what laws and what principles are germane to specifically the harnessing of nuclear energy, and not covering those issues which are only causals, marginal types of concepts. If a person desires to understand the Torah's approach to energy control and environment, one must glean bits and pieces from throughout the written and oral law and collect them together in an orderly manner. That's what we are trying to do with this lecture. The first lecture will be an overview of some of the principles, laws, and values that the Torah presents regarding energy control and environment. Some basic sources will be brought in this lecture. The second lecture will be dedicated to a closer look at sources. So this lecture is basically an overview. I will bring some sources in this lecture, but it's in the second lecture where we actually look at the Mishnah closely, where we look at the responsum more closely, where I translate the Hebrew into English. In other words, that's going to be a more focused view of the actual citations. This lecture is more of an overview. The second lecture will be dedicated to a closer look at sources. We will look at ancient citations and derive the principles that will guide us. That's a typo. That will guide us, not is, in addressing modern concerns of nuclear energy usage and control. Number 3. What are the broad questions and issues that present themselves when discussing Judaism or nuclear energy, or more broadly, Judaism and proper harnessing of energy for the personal and the common good. Our goal is to pinpoint and elaborate on the Torah's set of values, morals, principles, and laws that address the issue of energy control and preservation. Then we need to understand how the Torah directs us to respond to these issues. So first of all, we need to know what's the kasha? What is it that we have to worry about? You know, they say in Yiddish, a cheshbon is halb betzol, which means just knowing how much you owe is already half paid. You know, you have people who don't know what they owe to various people, and they don't want to think about it, and they don't have it written down, and those people have a real big problem. If a person at least has, even if they have no money, but at least they have written down exactly what they owe and how much and to who, then the people who are supposed to be receiving the money, they already know, this guy, he's half paid, meaning at least he knows that he owes me and how much he owes me. So we first have to know what are the issues. Once we know what the issues are, then we can take a look in the Torah and find out how does the Torah direct us to respond to these issues. Number 4. The Torah indeed is very vocal on a number of issues that directly relate to societal responsibilities regarding the use and conservation of energy sources. Some issues that come to mind are, what do you have to consider when exploring for energy sources? You know, you can't just go to a place and just start digging. You have to concern yourself. Who lives there? What lives there? You know, what are you going to be disturbing? Is there any type of economy that you're going to be impacting if you build a facility next to a particular city? And considering all of the safety issues and hazards that are involved with a nuclear energy facility. I mean, do you really want to have a nuclear energy facility built in a suburb, 500 feet from your house? I mean, who wants to have an airport in their backyard? Anytime a facility, nowadays they're finding, at least there are those that say that electrical wires, if you have an electric company not far from your house, that the moving of the current somehow could affect your bodies. And now that you've studied nuclear energy, maybe that's the case. So who wants to have an electric company and all of its all of the various electrical equipment and wires sending voltage all over the place? You want a nuclear facility in your backyard? So before you build one, you have to see how it impacts the society and the ecology. B, what procedures need to be followed when constructing a facility that produces the energy? How does the facility need to be maintained? Okay, once you build it. Now, what safeguards and procedures do we as Jews, does the Torah require us to make sure that are in effect? Does the Torah want to make sure that we keep everybody safe? Is there anything in the Torah that discusses that if we have a source of energy that we have to make sure everybody's safe? Well, just take a look at the beginning of Perek HaKones in Baba Kama, where it tells you that you got to lock the door, right? And you have to tie the animal up. Okay, there's your principle. You have an energy source, the animal. You have to take whatever measures are necessary to make sure that that energy source does not break out and harm others. D, how do you make sure that the society is benefited and not injured? How do you guard against resource depletion and destruction? Does the Torah talk about that you could just wantonly and non-discriminately use up your energy resources without thinking about replacing them or replenishing them? Yes, the Torah does talk about it. Not necessarily about nuclear energy, but about other energies. How do you maintain a healthy environment and ecology? Just take a look at the second parak of Baba Basra. How do we maintain God's creation as envisioned by the Torah? How do we resolve conflicts that arise between environmental issues and society's desire to live and prosper? What are the responsibilities to society when damage results from the energy producing facility?